Hello friends, welcome back. Want to walk into your next .NET Core interview with absolute confidence? This is the only video you will need. We are combining our best content on web APIs, microservices architecture, dependency injection, middleware, and much more. Tackling the critical questions and giving you the precise explanation to impress any interviewer. So come, without delay, let's get started. Hello friends, welcome back. In this video, we will cover the top interview questions for .NET Core and the Web API, complete with concise answers to help you prepare effectively. Whether you are a seasoned developer or new to the field, these insights will equip you for next job interview. So without delay, come let's get started. Alright. So before I go through some important questions, this is not a regular interview questions video where you have some questions and then you have a typical answers. No, I'm going to give you really very important concepts that can be asked, and questions can be framed in whatever way they want, right? But the concept is what is important. So we will focus only on important concepts, the way how interviewer is going to ask you the questions. Alright, so the first and important concept is somebody is going to ask you about implementing dependency injection in .NET Core Web API. So your answers could be like this. DI is already built into the .NET Core and can be configured in startup.cs using the configure service method. Now, the follow-up question could be, okay, fine, what kind of lifetime that can be registered? If they ask you, then the answer is services can be registered with lifetime like 3 types, like transient, scoped, and singleton. Transient creates new instance per request every single time that your constructor or anywhere that you are asking for instance. The transient type will give you a new instance. Scoped is per HTTP request, and singleton is shares the same instance of the application lifetime. Okay, this is very important. So there are one question and there is a follow-up question in this concept. Now let's quickly take a look at the real example, right? So if you go to program.cs with the .NET Core 8 or maybe 6 and above, there is no concept called configure service. Instead, the concept is same, but there is no special method like that. So these days we have just the main method. Okay, the place where you will inject or you will configure the DI is when you say builder. So here is the builder, right? So we say web application or create builder, and then we create an instance of that builder. So builder.service, that is where you configure your service. And then now builder.service, you see this dot add scope, that is the follow-up question that what we were talking about. There are 3 types: transient, you see this transient, scoped, and singleton. In my application I don't have singleton instance, but that's the 3 type. So you will configure builder.services dot add scoped or add transient or add singleton. So that's what it is. It's in the program.cs, not the startup.cs. Startup.cs is in the old way of writing, but these days it's directly in the program.cs under the main method. Alright, the next one is handling authentication and authorization in Web API. If they are asking you, how do you handle this authentication authorization? The simplest answer is, you'll be saying, I will use JWT token for the stateless authentication integrated with the Auth 2.0 or OpenID Connect. Okay, so this ASP.NET Core has a inbuilt support via Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.authentication.jwtbl. I will show you that in a moment, but we have a lot of applications that we developed which uses Azure AD B2C or Azure AD. Both deals with the JWT token, and the underlying frameworks are developed on top of the standards called Auth 2.0 and OpenID Connect. Okay, so that's what the answer is. I will give you all of these details so that you can prepare, but the concept is you need to understand what they meant to ask you and what you're supposed to answer. That's what the intention of this video. Now, this could be a follow-up question, what is JWT? I have a separate video talking about the JWT and how it is used, but in short, if I have to tell you, JWT is basically a compact, lightweight string kind of thing, which will have 3 types: header, payload, and signature, which is having all of this information which is sent in every request to the server, and server will be able to validate and treat you how you want to be treated based on your privileges. Okay, let's say your roles and other stuff, right? So that's how this is built. Now let's talk about this configuration of this datability. Again, our application deals with Azure AD B2C. Doesn't matter whether it is AD B2C or Identity Server or Azure AD or B2B, whatever it is, right? The concept is same. So if you come to this program.cs, we have something like the configuration here. Look at this, builder.servers, add authentication, and then you're saying the JWT bearer token dot authentication schema. This is where we will configure the authentication, and that deals with the JWT token. Okay, let's move on to the next one. What is middleware in .NET Core? So if they are talking about middleware, this is basically an important question. So let's understand. Middleware components are used to handle request and response in the request pipeline. I will show you in the code. You can create custom middlewares by implementing invoke or invoke async in a class and adding it via app.useMiddleware and then give the name. This is how you use, right? So middleware also executes sequentially and the order matters. Each piece passes the request to the next. Let's understand in the code. Again, we are in the same program.cs, and if you come all the way through down, after you configure all of these services, there is something called middlewares. So builder.build will get an instance of this app dot anything that you put, that's all called middleware. For example, use course is the middleware inbuilt by the Microsoft. Use exception handler is a middleware. All of these things that you see, it's middleware. But if you look at this, this is custom middleware. I created a middleware that we are talking about, right? So it gets the request delegate. You need to implement the invoke HTTP concept, and you just need to invoke it, and then you just pass on to it. All right, so this is called custom middleware. So basically app.use middleware, and then if you put your custom middleware, that is how you developed, like you use the middleware. But if you're using the inbuilt middleware, you just say app dot the middleware name. Okay, all of these things are middleware. Now order matters. Why order matters is it's like this, right? Think of this. A request comes in like this, it comes here, and then it executes all of these things, okay, till here, and then once the request is finished, it will go in the reverse order. That is why order matters, and that's why it's called request pipeline. Like if a water flows inside a pipe, how it goes? It goes through where you pour the water, and then it goes all the way to the end of the pipe. That's it, right? Same thing. That's why it's called middleware pipelines. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Handling error logging and exception. So how do you handle error globally, right? Don't say try catch. Try catch is meant mainly for non-managed code. Like if you have control, you don't need to write the try catch every single time, right? So how much you will write. So don't say it like that, right? Try catch is a good answer, but it's not the right answer, in fact. Okay, so if they're talking about error logging and handling exceptions globally in web API, what you need to refer is this one. Again, come to the program.cs. We have an inbuilt error handling mechanism here. You see this? When the request goes through like this, it is registered. Okay, so that's why the order of the pipeline matters. This is in the second order. It is registered, and anything that goes wrong after this, including the controller call, it will be caught here and it will come here. We are logging here, and then we handle the error. Now, there are other concepts, like there are something like application insights in Azure. You can use that kind of a logging mechanism to track every single thing that's going on with your application into your application insights in Azure. So then you can go through it and then find out a lot of information about how the application was going through, and you can improve it better. There are other error handling like logging mechanism like serilog, nlog. You can use any of those things for better logging mechanisms. Okay, so next thing, model of role binding. So now the next one is the role of model binding and model validation in web API. So the answer could be they're asking about how the model binding is working. The answer is model binding automatically maps the HTTP request data to action parameters. Validation ensures that the input meets the defined rules using data annotations like required, max, minimum length, or even the custom validators. Custom validators are created by implementing validatable object or writing custom attributes, or you can also use the external packages. Now let's take a look at this. So let's say we have a controller. Alright, so let's talk about this, right? Model binding. So we have a controller where we have a HTTP post method. So it expects the body to have this kind of a model. So whoever is sending will be sending these kind of information in the request body. As long as the property names matches, this model will be automatically binded. So model binding will happen automatically based on the incoming payload to map these properties, and then of course you'll have all the data, and then you'll be able to process. That's what called model binding. Now if you go inside this model, you see this, there is something called required, string length. These are called data annotation. This is how it will make sure that this topic property should be within 50 characters and it cannot be empty. If any of these two fails, it will reject automatically with 400 status code, which is called HTTP 400 status code, also called bad request. Bad request means client can always correct it and resend the request. That's what it called. Okay, so let's move on. What is implementing API versioning? Okay, so you might have seen a lot of videos in my channel that doesn't talks about API versioning. API versioning is very important. Let me give a very good example of a real-time application, right? So let's say there is an insurance company. Okay, insurance company don't deal with only the website that they have. There are other external agents who will talk to their APIs to generate some information in their own portal. Because let's say in India there is something called policy bazaar, or forget India, in US also you might have some agent company which is also generating some insurance behalf of the insurance company, right? So what I'm trying to say is APIs are exposed for the external parties to consume it. Now when there is a change in the underlying API information or the response, client, like the company who created the APIs, they don't change directly. If they change, what will happen? Think of this. Today you have a house, you have a door that everybody knows where to come and open it. Now you change the key of the door without telling the person who has the actual key. They cannot come inside that. Same thing will happen. If you change the existing API without informing the clients who's using those APIs, it will fail. There will be some drastic problems will happen. So that's why API versioning is coming into picture. So what API versioning will happen is you create a newer version of the existing API, like an improved or changes in the data model or the response or whatever it is, right? That will be named as V1, V2 or V3. It's called versioning of the APIs. So once you're done with that, they will be publishing these information to the consumers, like the agents. They will change whenever they wanted to change, and then eventually the older API will be retired. So that's what called API versioning. Okay, so versioning allows us to maintain backward compatibility while introducing changes to the current API. Okay, that's what called API versioning. What is the next one? Managing configuration and settings in ASP.NET Core. So in ASP.NET Core, you might have seen app settings.json, which will have their own stuff called development, production, staging, QA, all of those things. So if you look at this, app settings.json is there, and there's some specific settings for development, specific settings for production. This development, production, this is all named based on this setting. So if you go to launch settings, currently ASP.NET environment is set to end development. So when I run this application, this will be taken. Okay, now this is all fine for the locally developed application. However, there are something called configurations. You can also configure this in the Azure also. And then coming back to this concept, right? Configuration is handled via app settings.json. That is what I just explained you, and can be injected using the I configuration. So there is something called I configuration, which will read every single property of this configuration, which is in the app settings.json. So you can inject the I configuration and you can start using the properties by in any of the controller or services. You can also store all of this information into the Azure Key Vault, and you can use that in the deployed version. All right. And one thing you should remember from .NET 6 Plus, these settings are automatically refreshed during the runtime. All right. What is CORS? cross-origin resource sharing and how it is enabled. I will explain you in the code, but basically cross-origin resource sharing is, let's say we have application backend and the front end. Front end is hosted in one place, for example. All right, let's take an example. Okay, so this website is the front end application. Okay, and then this website, you see this URL, this is the URL, right? This is in one domain, and let's make a call. Okay, let's make a call like this, and there's an API call going, and look at this, the API calls request. Okay, so let's take a request, general information. You see this, smart learn by Karthik dash API. It's a different, these two are different. So whenever applications are hosted like this, which means cross origin resource sharing, this origin is sharing information with this origin, which is different. Now in order for the UI, like the one of the domain to talk to the different domain, this cross origin resource sharing should be enabled in the .NET Core. Only then this will work. If not, it will give you an error called CORS, like CORS error you will see in the console application. Okay, so that won't allow, because that's by nature, by default, the settings for preventing security issues. Think of this, right? You have a website, you're trying to call from your website to my website data. Can I give you data without knowing who you are? No, I won't. I need to register that, okay, you are allowed to access my website. That's what the configuration is. And let's go to this example. Let's go to program.cs and let's go all the way to the configuration service. You see this? I'm configuring in the service builder.service add CORS. This is the inbuilt one. And I'm saying I have a policy named default, and I'm allowing only this origin and this origin to go through. If any other origin tries to call this API, it will be rejected. Once you configure this, you need to come to the middleware and then say use this CORS. That is what from the coding perspective. Alright, so you know what is CORS and how to enable it, you know. What is the difference between .NET Core and .NET Framework? Okay, it's all very old question. Basically, .NET Frameworks are very much Windows dependent. .NET Framework applications are mainly for legacy applications and meant only to run on Windows servers. Windows, everything is Windows. You cannot run any application that is developed in .NET Framework on a Linux or a Mac. You cannot do that. Now, the .NET Core is a cross-platform, faster and ideal for modern and cloud-based and containerized-based application. Okay, so that's where we use the .NET Core, because now you can containerize this application and host it in Windows, Linux, anywhere. You can do that. That's the beauty of this, and that should be the difference that you need to explain if somebody asks you this kind of very basic questions. Okay, they might also ask you what kind of repository or unit of work pattern that you're using. Basically, the simplest answer, if you have used Entity Framework, trust me, this is a very good answer. Entity Framework or Entity Framework Core by itself, it's a repository and unit of work pattern inbuilt. Okay, because it tracks the changes and then it commits everything at one shot. That's called unit of work. Okay, so EF Core itself is a repository and unit of work pattern. But let's understand, repository pattern abstracts the data access and unit of work manages the transaction consistency. In a web API, they help manage complex data operations and improve the testability. If they cross-question you that is it okay for everything, the answer is basically the bigger application, the extra complexity will come into picture. Okay, so it all depends on the application and what you decide, but basically this is what the answer is. They ask you about asynchronous and synchronous programming in .NET Core. That's very important. Synchronous codes means you start the code till end of the thing, the same thread is used. Okay, so the more the code is synchronous and the more workload or the more traffic comes into your website, your performance will be very bad. Okay, because all the other threads needs to wait. I have a separate video for explaining how the asynchronous programming works. Take a look at that one. But in short, this is the answer. Basically, asynchronous. So basically, this is the short answer. Synchronous code blocks the thread until the task is completed, right? While asynchronous code allows the thread to handle other tasks while waiting for it. Async is crucial for scalability in web APIs, especially when dealing with input output bound operations like database calls or file storing, file reading, and all of those things are IO operations. Okay, that will consume time. You should be using the asynchronous operation. Now, to implement the async in web API, you basically use the async await keyword and return a task of t type in your control methods or in any of your services. That will allow us to avoid thread blocking. Okay, we have a lot of asynchronous implementation in our throughout application, so feel free to take a look. But basically, this is what your short answer should be. Implementing caching in your web API. Basically, caching is, there are different way of implementing caching. Okay, if you're talking about caching, it's basically storing or a small amount of information. For example, let's say a website that deals with the static categories. You don't need to call that category endpoint every single time unless the data is changed. So the moment the category is called, you save it, like you cache it in the server, and whenever the consecutive request comes, you don't need to talk to the database to get the category. Instead, you send the information directly to the caller. That will improve the performance of the system. Okay, and caching can be done at the server level, which will consume the server memory, or in advanced level, there's something called Redis cache or SQL Server caching. You can use any of those things, but in memory caching is fast but limited to a single server. Distributed caching works across multiple servers, good for cloud-based application, and response caching caches the entire HTTP response itself. So those are the different types of caching. Okay, so distributed caching and non-distributed caching means if you have a web application deployed in only one server, in-memory caching will work because the server will receive the request every single time. But distributed caching means the moment you have the same instance deployed in multiple servers, there will be a load balancer. We don't know load balancer where it will send. It will send to server A this time, next time it will send to the server B. Caching could have been done only in server A, not in server B. So that's why this Redis cache will come, which is mainly meant for the distributed caching. Alright. Now, we will talk about securing a web API with the HTTPS. See, HTTPS stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secured. So you have talked about, like you might have heard about SSL certificate. So any data that is transmitted between the HTTPS, they're all securely encrypted with 164-bit encryption. Okay. So that's why HTTPS is always secure and it is encrypted. The communication between the client and the server is always encrypted. Okay, you can also use these kind of settings called use HTTPS redirection and add some certificate for the protection environment. Okay, so we should understand for extra security. You can also say for extra security, HSTS, HTTP strict transport security can be added by calling app.usehsts to enforce HTTPS and prevent the protocol downgrade attacks. Those kind of things can be avoided. So take a look at this. If somebody asks about the securities, you can easily talk about this. Okay, if also you've been questioned about the file uploads and how do you handle the large file data transfer and all in web API, basically you will use iForm file to get the information of the file in the controller. Then either you store it in the Azure Blob Storage and retrieve it whenever you want, instead of storing it in the server itself, because it will go away. So you can store those kind of files in the Azure Blob Storage. For the large file, chunking the upload can avoid memory overflow. Now, security concept. Security concerns including the validating the type file size and all will help you to prevent the buffer overflow attack and limiting the upload size in the startup.cs. Okay, now let's talk about the next one. If they are talking about or asking you about the file uploads or how do you handle the large file transfer in a web API, the simplest answer is you use the iForm file that will allow us to get the file information in the controller, and then you can store that file securely, preferably in a cloud service like Azure Blob Storage. And for the large file, you should be able to chunking the upload can help the memory overflow issues. Now, in terms of security, you need to validate the file type. If the PDF is allowed, you allow only PDF, and if the PDF size can be only within 5 MB, allow only that. Okay, so those kind of configuration will help us to avoid unnecessary overflow attack, buffer overflow attack, and those configuration can be done in the startup.cs by using the max request body size. Okay, so those are the tips. We are talking about the Swagger. Swagger is basically a documentation. It's a tool to document, test, and interact with API. So in .NET Core, I use the Swasbuck package to integrate the Swagger UI for the auto-generating API documentation, right? So that will help us to understand, and you can even customize this by accepting the JWT token in the Swagger itself. Okay, so that will help the developers to understand and test the API in a better and faster way. Alright guys, so these are the very top important questions or the concepts that they can ask you. So I've explained you everything. If you like this or if you have any questions, do write it in the comment section. And if you have not subscribed, subscribe to my channel. Hello friends, welcome back. Ready for your .NET Core Dependency Injection interview questions? So we have got you some important 5 essential questions lined up, breaking down how services are managed and guiding you to the best answer from the options. So let's get started. Alright, so this is the website that I have logged in, and this is part of our full stack development video series. We built this wonderful website. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the course and select the .NET, and I'm going to focus only on the dependency injection. So I'm going to click on start the test, agree. I'm going to choose all the 7 questions, and before I hit the start button, or maybe let me hit the start button. So this is how the questions will be presented. But what we wanted to know was, before we start this exam, right, let's understand what is dependency injection. So if you come to this .NET Core project, okay, if you go to this program.cs, dependency injections are nothing but like for example, if you go to the controller, in the constructor you are asking instance of these 3, an instance of this, this, right? And if you go to any other constructor, similarly you are asking an instance of iChoice service. How this controller will know what instance of an implementation class to be given. Alright, so that is what the dependency injection is. So those dependency injection configuration is done in the program.cs. We will always say builder.services that whatever, right, whatever dependency services that we are configuring, it's all here, be it DB context, be it add controller, whatever it is. That's what called dependency injection. So based on that, the lot of important concepts they might ask you. So let's go over one by one. So how do you configure a one-to-many relationship using Fluent API? Not everybody uses Fluent API. That's one of the important user validation API. I think we have also used Fluent API. Literally, this application, whatever you're seeing here, its backend is here, and this uses the Fluent API. How do I tell you, or how do I prove you? You see this? I'm using Fluent validation. Okay, so basically they're saying, how do you do that? That is what they're asking. Basically, Fluent validation is here, D2A validation. Okay, so let's go to the question. So here, one-to-many relationship. So this model builder.entity, okay, where you are configuring this one-to-many will be the answer. I know this may not be usual for everyone, but don't worry, this will be the answer, and it will tell you what is the answer, why, like how you can tell in short. Now next set of questions will be very interesting. Why it is a good practice to inject an interface like my service rather than concrete class? So what are they saying? Let's understand what they're saying. For example, okay, so let's go to this choice controller. Okay, what do we have here? iChoice service, right? So they're saying, hey, why do you do this? You can inject this, right? Like this. You can inject the concrete class itself. Why are you injecting interface based? The reason, because in case if you want to do a unit test, this class needs to be provided, which means this class, whatever is using, also has to be concrete, and everything is like tightly coupled. Everything is tightly coupled. You're not supposed to use like that. You're supposed to use the interface based implementation. So that's why they're asking why it is a good practice. See, interfaces are faster at runtime. No, that's not the reason. Is it improves mocking and testing flexibility. Concrete classes can't be injected. It's also wrong. You can inject, but you're not supposed to inject. Okay, so this is the right answer. And why it is, they're saying, see, it's mainly for mocking and testing. You are like, if you write unit test, you can easily mock your methods. You don't need to hard code your methods. Okay, so now let's go to the next one. Which service lifetime is appropriate for stateless logic that should be reused across all requests? Great. Okay, so in the dependency injection, there is something called lifecycle for the services. The 3 life cycles: transient, scoped, single. See, all the 3 life cycle. First of all, you should know what is life cycle, what these 3 are doing. Then only you will be able to answer this, right? If they ask you a question around this life cycle, you should know what it is. Now, let's go back. Let's go back to this program.cs. Let's come here. You look at this. This service is configured as add scoped, but some service is configured as transient. I do not have a singleton, but let me explain you. When a request comes, okay, for example, here, let's undo this. Okay, let's say a request comes to this controller. This service, this interface is being asked, right? So dependency injection will give an instance of this, and then it will use this. So add scoped means whenever a particular interface is asking for an instance, for every single HTTP request, a new instance is provided. Let's say 10 call comes to the same endpoint, 10 each call will have its own instance. So add scoped is for per instance per HTTP call. Remember that. Transient means, let's say I use the service as transient. I inject it here, and let's say this call goes to the service. There also I inject. For every time it is injected in the constructor asking for an instance, a new instance is given. That is what called add transient. Transient means for every single ask, new instance is provided. Singleton means only one time whoever asks first, that instance is provided. The same instance is used across the application, throughout the application, till the application dies. So the application starts, one instance is created, that is given across the application. When the application shutdowns, that instance goes away. Okay, so be careful with the singleton instance. Let's go back and read the question. They're saying, how do you reuse for all requests? Now, based on what I explained, reuse for all requests is singleton. Right? So you should know these 3 things and you can answer by yourself. They will definitely select you. Next, what is the primary purpose of dependency injection? We just explained you, right? I was explaining you all this time why you have to. It's let's see. Do you have to write more code? No. To tightly couple the class? No, it's wrong. To manage object life cycles and dependency? Yes. That should be the answer. Okay, so you have a short interview answer, explanation, you have a reference link also in case if you want it. Now, in this line, based on what I explained, they're asking, what is this? What is this doing? You see add scoped, which means per HTTP per request. Let's see which is matching. Registers this to use this instance for every single request. That is the right answer. Alright, now let's go back to the next one so you understand the concepts. You are getting an error, unable to resolve services of type this, attempting to. Okay, this error is very common. All of my subscribers or many of my subscribers have already faced this. Let's give it a try to reproduce this. Now, what I'm going to do, what is this? Okay, so this uses choice services. Let's go back here. Okay, let's see where is this here. Let's say I forgot to do this. Okay, I'm going to run this. This is very common. When you run this in a kestrel mode, it will build and run. It will try to run actually. See what happens, right, in .NET Core. When it is trying to build and run, it will try to construct all the services. So there is a controller, it will try to construct the services. But by the time it is trying to construct, it will figure out that something is missing. Okay, so totally I forgot to configure a service, but I use that service in one of the controller or any of the other services. I'm trying to inject a service. So now it will show us that error. Let's take a look. All right, I just disabled in one of the services in another project, and you can see here some services are not able to construct it. Basically, it is trying to tell you that, hey, you were trying to use a service, but it was not able to construct because you didn't declare it in the DI. It won't tell you explicitly, but if you see this kind of an error, that is what it is. You see this, unable to resolve service for IMapper. What did I do? All I did is I came here, I just commented this. If I uncomment this, it will work because this automapper, right, has been used in the application, and of course it will not be able to construct. So if you encounter such error of errors, you should know what you have done. So basically here, if you get this kind of error, what is that? What is the problem? So you injected a private, you forgot to add the service in this one. That is what the answer is. Okay, see, this usually happens when the service isn't registered in the DI container. Exactly whatever I explained you. Now you have a service that makes use of DB context. What lifetime should you register with the service? Can we guess? It is not singleton, because if singleton happens, what happens? It will be a problem for other requests, right? Transient, too many requests. It should be scoped, because for every single HTTP request, we need a separate instance for the DB context. Where is this configured? Again, let's go back to program, and here itself we can see this is how you configure it. Okay, now I hope you enjoy this video. If you come here, please give me honest feedback of how you felt. By the time you come here, either new questions will be added, or you can test yourself with the different exams. And if you come here, you can check what are the answers correct. If you wanted to review by yourself, like if you wanted to go through one more time, you can check here, open up this, you can keep seeing all the requests, and all the related videos are here. You can search here, you can go here, you can search SQL or database or middleware, .NET. All of those videos are here. Okay, it's all for reference purpose. And I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. And if you like this video, just hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, share this with your friends and social media, and stay tuned. Want to confidently explain .NET Core middleware concepts in your next interview? So join us as we dive into 5 essential questions and provide concise explanation and helping you choose the right answer so you can articulate your knowledge effectively. So come, let's get started. So this is a website I've logged in, and this is part of the previous full stack video we developed using .NET Core 9, Angular 19, and a lot of Azure services. So I'm going to go to the course, choose .NET, and I'm going to focus only on the middleware. I'm going to focus only on the middlewares. So you can come here, you can choose a practice mode, that will be the best. And if you wanted to just write without the practice mode and check this and write it. Now, before I start the exam, what I wanted to show you was, I wanted to brush up some important concepts. So this is the project, that is the one that you are seeing in the website. So this is developed using .NET Core 9, a lot of web endpoints, and it is based on clean architecture. Now let's talk about the middlewares. Okay, so in .NET Core, if you go to this program.cs, okay, there are 2 important things. Under the main, the first concept is called services. Okay, the first one is the services, second one is the middleware. Okay, services are nothing but you configure all of your dependency injections. For example, whatever you're seeing here is a service. We configure the service, we configure our dependency injection by saying, okay, add scoped, which instance has to be given when this is invoked, like when this is requested. So this is all called services. Now if you come down, even in your application, right? Whenever you see builder.build and you name something like app, it doesn't matter, it can be any name, but basically an instance of this. After this, whatever you do is called middlewares. So imagine you have a water pipe. So let's take an example of this pipelines, right? So this is what pipe, a general water pipe. So the reason why I'm showing this is, imagine this is the starting and end of the pipelines in the .NET Core. So a request comes here, okay? It goes through the pipe, it doesn't go anywhere outside. It just goes through inside and then comes outside. Now the same request, right? When it is processed, it goes like this, goes in the reverse order like this. Now, this is very important to know. Pipelines are executed in the order it has been configured. So for example, so here, right? So we are having everything is here is pipeline. So the first one in the pipeline is use cars. Second one is exception handling. And then we have some middleware's pipeline. We have these many pipelines. So the reason why I said this, request will go through like this, okay, and then comes back like this, okay. The reason why the exception handling is in the second pipeline, because after exception handling, if anything goes wrong in this code, this will catch. If this was after this will not catch, because the error occurred before the pipeline itself. So that's very important to know how pipelines are working in .NET Core. Now let's go back to the question. So the first question is, how can a middleware prevent a request from reaching the rest of the pipeline? It is asking, how do you prevent it to go to the next one? So what you can do is, you can actually, let's take a look at it. Set context.response equal to null. Don't register the next pipeline. That's wrong. You cannot avoid registering it. It has to register. Skip calling await.next. So this is the right answer. The reason is, in the pipeline, in the middleware, right? If you skip this line, it won't call the next one. That's what it is. So you should know what is pipeline, when do you use this context, and how, like one pipeline will hand over the request from its current to the next one. Similarly, all the stuff will go and handle over the next pipeline. Okay, so this is how you prevent. So you should understand what is middleware and how pipelines are working. Next one, what is the purpose of middleware in the ASP.NET Core? Again, like I already explained you, each one has its own functionality, and it has to process the HTTP request and response. So answers should be processing HTTP request and response in a pipeline, and it also tells you what is the short answer for this. Middleware components from a pipeline that process incoming request and outgoing response in ASP.NET Core. All right, we have more details here. If you're interested, you can go over here. All right, the next one is, it's giving us a code and tell us what is the custom middleware, which is the right one that describes a custom middleware. The first one is incomplete, second one is also incomplete, third one looks correct because it has the middleware name, it has all of the stuff, including handing over to the next one. You see this, await next. So this should be the right answer, and it also says why it is right answer. Okay, next one, you need to log the time taken by each request. What is the best way to do it in ASP.NET Core? Again, we can write a custom middleware, because if you see, filter is not for that purpose, logger is for logging, but you cannot log the timings. Now let's take back this, right? So what happens is, if let's say this is the custom middleware, okay, this is a custom middleware, the request comes, we start the timer, it goes, finishes, takes like 5 seconds, come back. When it comes, it will go through this. When it goes through this, we will stop the timer and log the timing. So that way we can exactly calculate the time for a given request. So if you want to see existing middleware, see response body middleware. Response body middleware is after the response is being sent, it will come here. So like this, you can create your custom middleware to log the request timings. All right, see, this is how it measures globally. Okay, the last one, why is the order of middleware important? Okay, so why is this important? I already explained you, if the order is in the wrong way, for example, exception middleware, that was in the second middleware, right? If the exception middleware is not in the second, let's say here, if this was kept here, what will happen? it will go through all the pipelines. Let's say there's an error here. The exception middleware will not even handle that because exception happened before even it comes to that middleware. So the order of the middleware is very important. Okay, so here, just to answer this based on the concept that we know, first middleware handles all the requests. Middleware components are executed in the order they are registered. That is why that is very important. Okay, so it also says placing them correctly will process the request and response, and its behavior changes if you do it incorrectly. All right, so these are some of the important concept, especially for the microservices, especially for the middlewares. And you can come here and check. We can check the answer here. You can come here. You can go back and also check the whatever you typed, and it will also give you the description. So in case if you want to refer something, you can come here and refer, and that's how you understand and try to answer by yourself. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, just hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, share this with your friends and social media. So stay tuned. Hello friends, welcome back. Want to confidently explain the .NET Core microservices concept in your next interview? Join us as we dive into essential questions and provide concise explanation and helping you choose the right answers so you can articulate your knowledge effectively. So come, without delay, let's get started. I logged into this website, and this website is actually our last full stack development video where we developed extensive wonderful application with Angular, .NET Core and Azure services. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to course, choose the .NET Core, and I'm going to specifically talk about the microservices. So the reason why I'm going to do like this is this way you know how to write your exams. You can also confidently come back here and take up your own test to see to evaluate yourself. All right, not only that, I will also explain you what exactly that question is, what concept you should know so that you can answer by yourself. Nobody is going to ask you pre-written answers for any of their questions. So come, let's get started. So here, as you go, I'm going to choose whatever I have. I'm going to choose the practice mode, and practice mode is going to help us, which I'm going to show you now. So the very first question, right? This is again related to microservices. So in a microservice architecture, how should data be shared between services? All right, so before we get into any of these interview questions, let's quickly take a look at what is microservices. So microservices is nothing but small services that does some work. Okay, they are nothing related to technology. They are actually architectural patterns. For example, if you go to Amazon, okay, so Amazon has a lot of features, right? They have ordering, they have cart, they have wish list, they have products. You can just keep going. Now, instead of building all of this stuff into one project or one application, what this microservice will do is they will build a service. Like service means that contains few endpoints, and let's say order services. Okay, a microservices that is specifically meant for ordering. When you say ordering, order related stuff, viewing orders, placing orders, finding out the history of the orders, all of those order related stuff alone, that will be a separate microservice, right? So like that, in order to build this website, they will have n number of microservices working together to fulfill a portal. So basically, that is what microservices. So in this itself, if I have to split into microservices, I can do exam writing is its one microservices, handling users, which is profile and all of those, is microservices. Like that, I can keep splitting into small services. Now let's come back to the question, so you at least know what is microservices now. So in a microservice architecture, how should data be shared between services? That is what the question is. Let's go over all of these things based on what I just mentioned. Let's guess what you not guess. Let's try to answer it. through a shared database, via service-to-service communication on event, using global variables, by copying tables between database. Okay, these are the options. Now, I will also show you what if I choose something wrong, which is fine, right? So let's say I choose this is via service-to-service communications or via event. Let's see what happens. Okay, the answer is correct. Now, the good part of this kind of the way we study here is after you answer yourself, like just read the question as you progress, you're able to answer by yourself or at least choose the right one. And then if you open up the explanation, it will tell you this very short description that you need to tell it in the interview. So each microservices own its own database. That's how microservice architecture works. Okay, so when I say product orders, they have their own database, but eventually they will communicate with based on events and other stuff. So if sharing is needed, we use API calls or event-driven architecture for messaging. Like, that's how services will communicate. For example, again, I'll just tell you one more example, right? Let's say you place an order. When you place an order, it goes and sits in a queue, or it triggers an action, and then it goes and sits in a database. Maybe some other queue will be listening, an order has come, and then it starts its work, like logic apps. So a lot many stuff goes on. Okay, so let's stick to these questions. Let's go to the second one. Our next one is, which library is commonly used in .NET Core to implement the resiliency? This is how they will ask you. Okay, they might ask you, okay, how do you implement resilience in .NET Core or in microservices? You just need to know what they're talking about. So let's go over the options. So Serilog, let's talk about Serilog. Serilog is basically a logging mechanism, right? Like similar to Enphase, Nlog, or Serilog is one of the most popular logging. So definitely this is not the answer. Swagger, again, it just reads the endpoints and shows you the documentation of endpoints. So this is also not an answer. Poly is basically can be used for retrying and all of those things. Mediate R is basically the CQRS pattern. So let's say I'm going to show you if I choose something wrong, okay, and then we'll see the explanation. So let's say we'll go with resilience, right? So let's go with this. Let's say, right, this is what happens if I choose something wrong. Okay, so the answer is poly. See, use poly for adding retries. Like I said, poly is used for retrying mechanism, right? Circuit breakers and fallback logic, all of those things are applicable during using poly. I'm not sure I use this in the in our example of the .NET Core, but probably next time I will include this, how poly will work with the retry logics. All right, so this is how it works, right? If you go wrong, it's okay. You just need to know what is right and what is wrong, and you should also know how to answer it. And more details are here. Okay, so always you'll get this kind of explanation and reference links. Now let's move on to the next one. How do you register a typed HTTP client in .NET Core for communicating between microservices? Okay, so basically what they're asking us, if you go to our any of our .NET Core project, so basically here in the program.cs, this is where we configure the dependency injection, right? So whatever you configure here is normal, the interface and its implementation. But question here is, how do you do for HTTP client? That is what the question is, meaning this is not the regular one, right? This is all about a service that talks about the HTTP client. So if you've already guessed what is the answer should be this, because this is different. This is middleware. See, services dot, this is different, this is different. Let's see, this is the answer. So it's a registration of this add HTTP client, what makes the HTTP calls. Okay, so this is the right answer. Now let's go to the next one. Which of the following best describe microservice architecture? I already explained to you what is microservice, right? So let's say based on what I described in the first, right, this is not a single code base for all functionality. This is absolutely wrong. An architecture that breaks down the application into smaller independent deployable servers. Like I said, product separate, order separate, address separate, all are separate. So this should be the right answer. So when somebody is asking you a question, you should first understand what they're asking, and you can answer it in your own way but correctly. So that's why I'm trying to explain you and also help you to choose the right answer. This should be the right answer, and it also tells why. There's an explanation, there's a reference links you can go and study. The next one, what is the main responsibility of an API gateway in a microservice architecture? Okay, let me first explain you two important concepts here: API gateway and microservice, like this, right? So now let's say the site, okay, has, okay, you know what, this is too big. Maybe for realistic, okay, we'll talk about realistic one, right? So they deployed, like, they split this whole portal into, let's say, 50 different microservices: order, product, address, etc., etc. Now, from the UI, they don't communicate with the backend directly. What will happen is there'll be a middle layer that's called the gateway. It's like you go to apartment, right? You go to a very big apartment. An apartment will have 400, 500 units, which means 500 houses. Imagine all of those 500 houses as endpoints. Now, when you come, whom do you face first? All right, so let's take an example, okay? So this is apartment, right? So when you come here, this is where you enter. You have so many houses, okay? Now what happens is, if a courier guy comes, or a parcel delivery comes, he comes here, he gives to the security, right? Then security, based on the apartment number, he delivers it to that right apartment, correct? Exactly the same thing. API gateways are nothing but a gateway where the front end will come and talk to the gateway, and gateway knows where the request should be routed. If you go and talk to /product/5, it knows it needs to go to this one where the product API resides. Okay, that is what it is. So an API gateway, in terms of microservice architecture, what is it? What is its responsibility? So let's answer it based on what I said. Managing internal database, definitely no. We didn't explain that. Handling authentication, routing, and aggregation of requests. Exactly. The gateway is responsible for authenticating the request, like verifying, routing the request, and aggregation of requests. Aggregation of requests is nothing but it collects the information and then sends back to the caller. That's what exactly it is. An API gateway centralizes the request routing, load balancing, security, and can even aggregate the result from multiple services. All right. So when you go for an interview, you should know what is gateway, API gateway. What does that role play in the microservice architecture? This all proves you that you have knowledge and you're ready for taking up better role than a fresher. Now next, what is the most common method of communication between microservices in .NET Core? Again, how do they communicate? We already saw in the second question, I believe. They talk to services, right? So REST API over HTTP. Nothing else matches. Let's see. Oops. Exactly. Based on what I explained, they can communicate, like everything is endpoint, right? One endpoint calls another endpoint over the HTTPS. So that's why this is the answer. And there's an explanation here. REST APIs over HTTP are the most common and language agnostic way of microservice to talk to each other. And let's say RabbitMQ, there are many other messaging servers like Azure Service Bus. There's so many stuff, right? So that's how it works. So you should know what it is. And the next one, in large microservice architecture, how do services discover each other dynamically? Very great. It's easy to ask these kind of questions. Not exactly like that, but concept around this area. So how do they discover? That's what they're asking. So hard-coded URL, no, definitely no, it's wrong. Service discover tools like console or Eureka, or shared folder environment variables. Let's go with this. That's the answer. So we use this service discovery, so services can be registering themselves and discover other services dynamically. All right. Last but not least, how can you secure the communication between microservices? Always securing microservices, right? Securing the communication is over the HTTPS. You see this? If I go here, if I go to this end, let's say, if I go to this end, you see this, what it is? HTTPS. All right. So hypertext transfer protocol secured. So SSL layer is applied so that any communication between this website and the backend will be encrypted. Okay, so answer should be this. Mutual TLS is another concept of verifying the caller and the sender, or JWT. We use this JWT concept here. JSON web token. All right, so that should be the answer, and it also tells you what it is, why it is. All right, so we have come to the last question. Microservices. This is fair enough to clear the interview. These are like, we have one beginner, intermediate, and advanced questions. If you do so, please give an honest feedback here. And this is how we finished exam. We can come here, check. We were one wrong. You remember? Poly was the answer, and that's why we are 88% out of 100. Let's go back. Let's see how we can review it. So you can go to this view in practice mode. You can also check here. It'll explain you. Don't worry if you have missed it. You can come back here. Always come back and check what is our answer you wrote. All right, so you can keep going like this, and all the 8 questions will be answered here. And finally, you can come back and check all of your tests. You can take any number of tests here. A lot of important questions and many concepts will be added frequently. So come here, test your knowledge, and also go through other videos in my channel so you get more knowledge on the real-time questions. Not only questions, real-time implementation. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, just hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, share this with your friends and social media, help grow this channel. And stay tuned, guys. I'll see you in the next important video. Bye-bye. Hello friends, welcome back. Want to truly understand the .NET Core Web APIs for your interview, not just memorizing the answers. So join us as we explore the essential concepts through the 10+ targeted questions, providing concise explanation and guiding you to the best response. So come, let's get started. So let's do something interesting and useful, not like the regular question answer videos. So here is what we are going to do. I'm going to present some important questions by going to this course, selecting this .NET Core, and we are focusing on .NET Core Web API. So I'm going to start this question. Let's go over all the 12 questions. By the time you come here and take up your test, you might have more questions, or these are the important things that you need to know from the interview perspective. So when we start, every single question I will explain you the important concepts, so that way you can actually articulate or explain in your own words. That is what the interviewer will look for. There is no hard and fast rule of by hatting something for a specific question. That doesn't work going forward. They always try to test your knowledge, not any question and the respective answers. All right, so come, let's dive in. I'm going to choose this 12, and we are in the practice mode, and you'll see how things works. Let's start the exam. In the first one, what is the bad security practice in web API development? Okay, so these kind of questions, if they ask, you can, if you know answer, you can tell by yourself. Or let's say what options we have, right? Using HTTPS. No, absolutely this is wrong answer, because HTTPS stands for hypertext transfer protocol secured. Like, it has a SSL layer for securing the communication between the API content that's going over the network. So this is not the bad practice, it's a good practice. Validating user input is also good practice. Let's say returning stack traces in error response, and implementing token base. So implementing token base is absolutely a good secure practice. But here is what the answer is. You should not and never return what happened in your server, like errors. You cannot return those kind of errors. You cannot return those kind of errors in the response, because client will see, whoever is using will see your content, your stuffs are exposed outside. So you should not do that. So I can choose this, click on this, it will tell you why. Revealing internal details like stack trace, DB errors, and all of those things are unsafe. Okay, so that's the reason. All right, the next question is, basically they are saying what is the right way to define a method in the controller that should correspond to this URL. Okay, so let's understand what they're doing here. They have a controller that inherits the controller base. So far good. Their out is API/controller, which means before this slash is a domain name. For example here. Okay, so this is a domain name /API/products. How this products came? You see this controller name is products. When you define slash controller in bracket, it will actually take this word, the prefix before the controller. So this will form API slash products. Now we need to say slash 5. And by this question, you know this is a get endpoint. So let's take a look at this. We can go with the right answer here. All right. So this should give us slash products slash IT or HTTP get. Okay. So if you notice, if you choose this, it will not match this. Why? Because the route is specifically saying it should be slash product slash 5. ID stands for 5. But here API didn't come. So this is incorrect answer. The correct answer is this, because it will actually take this followed by the ID. Okay, so let's see. This is the right answer. The controller route is API slash products and ID. So this is the correct one. If you choose this or you've thought of this, it's incorrect, because this will not have slash API. It will directly have the website name slash product slash 5. Okay, so that is not what they want. All right, so the reason why you're looking at this question is you should know how a controller and route works for the methods. Next one, what is the most scalable way to handle exception across all of the web API? So you have like 5 controllers, like 7 or 8 methods in each controller, like 45 endpoints. How do you handle it? Can you handle it using try catch in every action method? Yes, but it's a bad way of writing. Return an exception message directly to the client, very bad. Can you use a global exception handling in the middleware? Alright, let's take a look at the code. Okay, so for the web API project, if you go to the program.cs, this is the middleware. See, I am using use exception handler middleware. That's a middleware, and I'm writing some logic here. So any exception happens across the application will be caught here. So one single place globally handled. That's why it is right value. This is the right answer. Okay. Now what happens if model validation fails in an API controller? So user is the model property, and let's say user has something like some properties, name, email ID. They didn't send it when they did the post. What happens? That's what the question is. Can you guess what it is? The right answer is any model validation happens if the value, for example, email. If the email is not provided, an email property is there, you will see a 400 bad request. So in this whole concept, what you should understand is a request is made to the server, okay, but the request is incomplete. The request does not have the required content to for the server to process, which means it is called a bad request. All 400 requests, 400 and change, like especially 400 requests, right? It's called a bad request, and which means that can be corrected by the client and resend it. Okay, so this is what will happen if a model is there, it has some required properties, and model validation fails. It won't even come to the controller, it will directly reject with the 400 bad request. See, that's how it works. See, API controller automatically validates the model state and returns the 400 bad request. If you're not aware of this, just let me know in the comment section that you learned something new, but that's how it works. Okay, it automatically rejects with the 400 status code, HTTP status code 400. All right, let's move on. What's the recommended way to support API versioning? Okay, so we have seen enough videos in our channel, but we never covered the versioning. So basically versioning, let's understand, right? So today you're doing a business, you have application, you hosted like n number of endpoints. Now these endpoints are consumed by the clients, like they pay you. For example, let's take a realistic example. Airlines, you go to skyscanner.com or any third-party website which talks to the airlines and show something. So they will be using some APIs to get the data. What happens if the airlines wanted to change the functionality of the existing API? They cannot touch that. If they touch it, whoever is using will be broken, right? They cannot lose their business. So what they do is the same endpoint, they will version it, meaning once they have a new endpoint, new versioning with the new functionality, they will slowly intimate the consumers that, hey, change from V1 to V2, from V2 to V3. Same endpoint, a little difference in the URL, that's it. That's what it's called versioning. So according to this question, now you understand what is versioning in web API, and answer is basically in this one, it's all of the above. Query string with the v2 v3 also tells what version of the API it is. That's also correct. You can also have a separate products v2 controller, like just an example. You can also use the versioning packages. So all of the three are correct actually. And when you do this, sometimes you will also get the reference here. You can actually click this, like if you click this, it'll take you here. You can read through more about it. Okay, that's what it is. Next one, why should web API methods use async and return task of I action result? So let's take a look before we check the answers. So let's take a look at any of our endpoints here. Okay, let's say choice controller. You see this, all of this are having async and a task, right? So those who are not aware of asynchronous programming helps us to unblock the IO operation, input output operation. Okay, so when a call is made here, if you do not have asynchronous operations written, the main thread will come and wait here till it finishes. So eventually, right, it will block the more incoming requests. So that's the best idea to have a synchronous call. So to answer to that specific question, you see this one, right? This API is calling a synchronous method. Okay, and you need to use async await so that it will be a non-blocking thread. That is what you need to answer. Okay, it will unblock the main thread, main HTTP threads. Okay, so for example, right, I can just remove this. I can make this as a bad code. Let's do this, right? So if I do this, what will happen? This will become a synchronous code. Now the main call will come, it finishes here, that thread is still waiting, doing nothing. If this takes 5 seconds, the thread is like doing nothing. And then it goes and returns this. Okay, that will eventually make more issues. So in order to make an asynchronous call as asynchronous way of writing, you just use the await keyword before the asynchronous method, and this one needs to be a task of something generic, task of t. In this case, task of I action result. Because we use await, we need to use async keyword. So the asynchronous concept is async await keyword. It has to return a task of t. In this case, it's I action result, and you use the await keyword in front of asynchronous method. Okay, so that way this will not hold the thread till it finishes that work. Okay, so let's go back and see. So in this case, answer is basically it doesn't block anything. Why you have to use? That's the question. It allows better scalability of IO bound work. This is the right answer. None of the other things are right answer. You see this? Async method free ups the thread during IO operation, enables a better throughput and resource usage. You don't need to just tell this. This is for your understanding. As long as you are able to explain why you use async and this one, if you are able to explain why you use async and task, that's it. Asynchronous method needs to have an async keyword and it should return a task of t. That's it. That should be enough. Alright, so the next one is, why are DTOs, data transfer objects, are used in .NET Core Web API? Can you answer this? Any of these things? Just guess it, what it is. But before that, let's take a look at what is this. So I'm going to open up this project, and you can see, if I go to any of this controller called, course controller, okay, what are we doing? This is calling get courses, and it is returning course DTO. What is course DTO? It has only 5 properties. Okay, custom properties, like these 3 properties followed by some 2 extra properties. But if you notice, what we are doing is we are actually calling get all courses. You see this? So this one, let's go here. See, we first call the database, we get the courses. See, this is the courses, but we convert that course into course DTO. Why? Let's go here and see why. What do we have it in course? See, course has these many things created by exams, questions. We don't want it to send all of these things. So you cannot use the database entity directly. Instead, you will create something called DTOs, data transfer object, which means you will create custom properties. The properties can be having the same name or extra properties that doesn't have it in the main property. Okay, it doesn't matter. You will send only the required information to the user. We convert the entities into the custom data object, which is called DTO. So in this case, I just explained you how course entity is converted into course DTO. We send only these information. So now you know why we use, and this is how you can answer by yourself. And here you can see, so to directly map the database entities to the front end, wrong. To control what data is exposed to the client, right? That is what all I was explaining. And it clearly shows you why it is. Okay, it protects the sensitive fields. It doesn't just send everything that is there in our database table. Okay, now next one, what attribute is used to define a web API controller? Okay, based on the initial thing, you can check, do we have controller? If you say controller, it's called MVC. But for web API controller, it is called API controller. Let's go again, go to any of the controller, go all the way through, either controller base or API controller. Okay, not just the controller. If you say just controller, this is wrong. This is for MVC. See, API controller is the right one, and here's the explanation and the details here. What happens if you register a service with add scope in startup? Okay, in interview, right, they'll ask you about 3 types of service life cycle thing that you can configure. One is add scope, one is add transient, one is add singleton. So in this case, you should first know what all of these 3 things are doing, and then you will be able to answer add scope. So let me explain you. Add scope means when a request comes, a particular service. Let's go here. Let's go to the middleware. Let's go and take a look at the example. Okay, here you go. See, add scope. So we are telling the configuration, that dependency injection configuration, that hey, if somebody is asking for iCourse repository in anywhere, like in the injection, then use a new instance of course repository. For every single HTTP request, it will create only one new instance of this. So if a request comes, if this is injected in like 5 places, only once will be given. Add transient, for every single place where they are asking, a new instance is given. That's called add transient. Add singleton, I don't have it here, but basically add singleton is across the application. After the application boots for the first time, only one instance will be there, and that will be shared across everyone who is asking. So be careful when to use a singleton, because it is not thread safe. It can easily get into issues. So you should use singleton only when it is required, and you use only transient when it is required. Add scope is the best one that you use. Every single call, every single HTTP request gets its own objects. Okay, instance of the particular object. All right, so now based on this, you know what it is. They're asking what happens if you do this. A new instance is created for each HTTP request. That is what I just explained to you, right? None of these are applicable. Let's move on. What does this endpoint response to? So we have an iAction result, a method name called create. It is expecting a product as a model, and it is just a post. And what it is doing, nothing. It just returns a okay. Now, what happens is when you call this post products, this is post, right? So this is the right answer. But basically you should understand okay means it will return HTTP status code 200. But the question is what it is doing. Based on this answer, based on this answers, this is a post call, because HTTP post is marked here. All right, next one. What status code does this return and why? See, it's interesting, right? It is API/product/ ID. It is a get product. Let's see. It tries to find the product. If the product is not found, which is equal to null, it returns this. If this is false, it returns this. So here we know OK means returns HTTP status code 200. Not found means it returns 404. So you should be aware of HTTP status code. Not found means 404. Okay, they are expecting a product ID 5. Product ID 5 doesn't exist in database. So according to this code, basically this returns a 404 if product is not found. It doesn't return always 200. This is wrong answer. This is wrong answer. It doesn't throw any exception. This is wrong answer. This is the right answer. And why? You should know why. That's very important. Okay. Last and final questions. When would you use a custom action filter in ASP.NET Core? Custom action filter means action filter. Okay. An action means a web API method is invoked. So custom action filter means basically it is to apply a particular logic before or after the controller execution. Okay, and I'll explain you why. So if you look at this, any of this controller, let's go to this question controller. You see this? There's something called admin role. Admin role is a custom action. On authorization, it is going to execute this. So basically, it will check whether it is an admin or not, the incoming user. If it is admin only, this call will execute. If not, what will happen? It will reject a 403 here itself. It won't even reach the controller. So answer is to apply a logic before or after the controller execution. Depends on what you use, but this is the right answer. All right. Next, these are the levels of questions that we took. If you know the concept, that will be very great. And I'm going to say all good, but you provide your honest feedback when you take up the test. Okay, for any test that you take, please provide honest feedback. I'll be able to cross check what you gave and I'll improve it. Okay, exam is finished. I can go here. I can check this exam here. Great, all the answers were correct. Let's go back. You can also do one thing. If you're in a practice mode, you can come here and you can actually review it. You can also expand this. You can review what you selected. Even if you go wrong, it will tell you what is wrong. All right, so this is how you do, and at the end of the question it will always take you to the main page. Here you go, last one. All right, so you can come here, you can choose whatever you want. You can write as many exams as you want, but the whole idea of this interview video is to explain the concept precisely and to help you tell by yourself. That's very important in interview to clear. All right, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, just hit that like button, subscribe to my channel, share this with your friends and in social media, help grow this channel. And if you have any specific questions or comments, just let me know in the comment section, and stay tuned. I'll have more videos coming up on the interview side. I'll help you clear the interviews. Stay tuned and I'll see you in the next video, guys. Bye bye. Hello friends, welcome back. Ready to test your .NET Core, EF Core knowledge for your next interview? We are diving into the crucial steps and tips, the best practices that interviewers will likely quiz you on. So let's see how well you know your EF Core. Come, let's get started. If you're new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. And I'm going to show you some important stuff with this website. So I've logged into this website. This is part of our previous full stack video. And if I go to course and choose the .NET Core and select this, we are now focusing on the entity framework code. So here it shows 5 questions, and I'm going to go over all the 5 questions, and I will also give you some important tips on EF Core. So let's start the test. I'll say agree, 5 questions, 15 minutes, and I'm going to choose the practice mode. If you're new to this, practice mode will help you to understand the answers in detail and also highlights what is correct and what is wrong. It's going to be a real interview thing. Okay, so let's start this. We have these 5 questions. Let's see, what is the first question? So what is the following code written? So this is using the lambda expression. It has some graph. So basically db context dot products, it includes the category, which means it's using a graph. This is parent-child relationship. We're also saying where category name equal to books. So what it is going to return, if you guess, it is going to return all the products with any category. Not really, right? It is going to return the products where the category is book, because we are filtering the categories with the book, and it is returning the product. This is the answer. So if you click here, it will show you answer is right or not. and it will also tell you a short interview answer. See, this returns all products, those category name is books, and includes the related category data, right, and the products, because it is giving you product plus it is also including the category table. All right, so this is the explanation of how things works. What is the short answer for the interview if somebody asks you like this? Let's go to the next one. How do you handle concurrency conflicts in EF core? Concurrency means one or more user or application or system trying to update a particular record at the same time. That's called concurrency, right? At the same time. Now, when you use EF core, if concurrency happens, what are you going to do? That is what the question is. The options are ignore them, use row version property, or wrap it with a try catch, use static methods. You can guess as before I reveal the answer, right? So guess it, be honest, and let's say what is the answer. Answer is this. Because none of them are correct, this is the right thing that you need to do. You have to go with the row version property. Let's see the explanation here. See, EF core supports the optimistic concurrency by using the row version, which is a byte of property which gets checked before the update. It tells you, it knows which one was first one to update. So this is the explanation. This is the even details. You can click here and go here and find out more. That's how the site is designed. All right. If you like the site itself, if you want to learn this whole stuff as a full stack development, there's a video there. You can go and watch that whole video. That will be awesome for a full stack developer. All right, let's focus on the entity framework code. Let's go to next question. What is the main role of DB context and entity framework? Okay, so let's read through it. If somebody asks you what is DB context, that's what the question is. Okay, let's say what will be your answer. It stores API routes. It's wrong, because API routes are dealing with the controllers. It tracks the changes and communicates with the database. This should be the right answer. Why? DB contexts are related to the database interaction. So this is tracking the changes and communicates with the database. Now, if you're new to this video and if you think of like Karthik, are they going to ask you like this and give you option for interview? No. The idea here is, if somebody asks you questions about the DB context in entity framework core, you should know what it does. And this is one of the good way to present this kind of a question and ask you as a test. So this is not only interview questions thing, it is also acting as a knowledge test. You can come here and test your knowledge. Okay, that's the whole idea of this video and the way why it is designed like this. So the answer is this. Let's see. See, DB context is the bridge between our domain or entity classes and the database. It tracks the changes, manages the database code operation. All right, so details are here. And if you look at this existing one, this is our DB context. Basically, if I go to DB context, right, a class that is inheriting the DB context that is coming from entity framework core, this class becomes the DB context. In the constructor, we pass the option so that we don't need to hardcode the database connection string from here. And every DB set of a particular class represents a table in the database. So every DB set of a class represents a table in the database. If you have these DB set only, you'll be able to access those tables. Okay, so you should understand what is DB context, how a class can become a DB context by just inheriting the DB context class that's coming from the Microsoft.entity framework code. Okay, so that's what it is. And let's move on to the next one. Next one is, you added a new column to your model, but running the app gives you a runtime error related to the database schema. What did you likely forget? What happened? See, this is very possible. These kind of questions can be asked in interview. If you do like this is basically model first approach. You added a new model, but when you try to access, it gives you error. What is logically wrong? If in the model first approach, basically you need to migrate that to the database, only then you will be able to access it, right? Even though in the code you will be able to access it, like for example this itself, right? If you have all of these things configured, but if this table is not there in the database, you cannot access it. Try to generate the query, but there is no such schemas in the real database. So here, register the model in startup, run .NET EF database update, clear the browser cache, add a controller. So this is the right answer, because in the model first approach, if you added a new column or new model, but you need to migrate that by saying .NET EF database update. It will tell you what is the right answer, and that's what the explanation is. Let's move on to the next one. We have something like, what feature in EF core should you use to avoid loading unnecessary related data? Okay, if you guess, answer is lazy loading, or you can also say it's including. So includes will include its child tables. Okay, avoid loading unnecessary data. You should not use the include. That's the answer that I chose. Let's see. Answer is wrong. Answer is as no tracking. So it also explains you. All right, so I can go wrong. It's okay. I wanted to show you what if I go wrong. If I choose something wrong, it will tell you it's wrong. And if you do so, it's okay. That's the learning phase, right? This is not the real interview. So answer is, as no tracking is useful to read only queries, because it tells EF core not to track changes. That improves the performance. So it says what feature. This is a feature in EF core should you use. You have to use this feature to avoid loading unnecessary later data. All right, so this is the answer. All right, let's go to the next question, and let's say good. You can give your honest feedback here based on what you choose, and it will come here. If I can go and choose my answers. This was the last one that we were wrong. And if I go to this practice mode, actually you can go and check what you chose, what was right and what is wrong. See, I'm going through all the questions. Like this, you can do it. If you don't want the practice exam, you can just ignore it. But let's go to the important other tips in the Entity Framework core. I'm going to open up the important project. So the last video series that we did was Smart Certify application. Okay, that's the application that we were working on here. Okay, now what you need to understand with terms of Entity Framework core, other important things. If you go here where the Entity Framework is configured, okay, so I'm going to expand this for better thing. Okay, so where is this? All right, so look at here. This is the configuration. So we are saying builder.service.add db context. This is the context, and this is the options, right? Now, option is basically we are saying, hey, pull up the connection string from here. That will be the connection string for the SQL server. Okay, this is the options. Till here is the option. When I say option, if I go here, the option is nothing but the one that we passed from there. Okay, so this contains the database connection string, and it will also contain, it's a retry logic. So if somebody says, hey, first time you tried to connect DB was failing, but you wanted to retry it, like automatic retry, how do you do that? Answer is, in the configuration of the database connection, like in the database configuration, you need to say provider option dot enable retry on failure. Basically what happens is, let's say in Azure you have a SQL server which went to a pause mode. Okay, the first time when the request is initiated, it is possible that the server is trying to boot up. You will see a timeout error, but if you enable this, what will happen? The application will automatically retry to connect a couple of times to ensure that it is connecting to the database. On after that couple of times, if it tries to fail, it could be a different issue. But the reason I was explaining is, it was in pause mode, it was trying to boot up. Enable retry on failure is the best option that you can choose, so that it will automatically retry by itself. Now, there are other important things. See, as this application is running, let me open up this. Okay, so all right, so this is the important thing. So I made an update, right? So if you look at this, this is the query that was generated by the Entity Framework, but these are the parameters. You see this @p is equal to 5. This is the value for this parameter, all the parameter has value here, right? So how am I getting this value? This is sensitive data. We're not supposed to get the values. Okay, now let's say you are into a situation where you don't know what's going on. What is the value being passed? You just don't know. And in order to get that sensitive data logging, okay, you have to come to this place and say enable sensitive data logging. If I remove this, okay, you're supposed to not to have this in the production, okay, only for debugging purpose or for development purpose. But if I don't have this, what will happen here? Instead of this value, it will just say some parameter. It won't give you what value was passed to this query. See, this is the query: update question, set question, like course id is equal to p0, right? P0, it is telling us what is this. But if you don't mark this like this, it won't log. So here is the point: if somebody asks you how you will debug what value was passed in the entity framework, you can temporarily enable this sensitive data logging that will show you the values that was passed in the query. Okay, and for detailed error logging, you can also enable enable detailed errors. So this is the place where you need to configure those things. All right, so these are the important things with respect to your entity framework code, that possibly they can ask you an interview question. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, hit the like button, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel, share this with your social media and share this with your friends. And if you have any questions, do let me know in the comment section. I will see you in the next interesting important interview questions video with respect to .NET Core and microservices. Alright guys, stay tuned and bye bye. Hello friends, welcome back. Are you getting ready for an EF Core interview? This video covers the top EF Core questions you need to know to impress any interviewer. These questions dive deep into real world scenarios, practical applications, and must to know concepts. So let's tackle what you really need to ace that interview. So if you're ready, come, let's get started. Alright, so before we get started, one request to all of you: do not buy heart. Instead, understand the concepts, and even if you explain in simple words from your side, that should be more than enough to clear the interview. Alright, so the very first question: what is EF Core and how does it differ from the regular entity framework, which is part of .NET framework, right? So there are two sets that I would say. One is an expected answer and one is explanation that is for your understanding. So you read both, and whichever is feeling good for you, you can come up with your own words. But in simple words, basically, EF Core is specifically meant for .NET Core, okay, that supports the cross-platform development and link you improvements and better performance. Okay, it does not support every single legacy stuff, but it has many good stuff added to the entity framework core, including migrations and alternate keys, batch updates, and so many stuff. If somebody asks you what is the purpose of the DB context class in EF Core, okay, this is very important. They can easily find out whether you really know entity framework or not. So DB context is the main class used to interact with the database in EF Core that handles the CRUD operation like create, read, update, delete, all kind of operations. Not only that, change tracking, connection management, everything is based on this DB context. So I have given a simple example. You see this? If there's a class that inherits the DB context, then you'll be able to use any of the DB context, the database related stuff using the entity framework. So you might have seen something like this, right? DB set of the table name, and then you will be able to access the table name. And on configuration, you can define what is the SQL connections thing and so on. So, okay. The next question is, how do you configure relationships between entities in EF Core? So, expected answer is either the data annotations or Fluent API to define the relationship like one-to-many or many-to-many and even one-to-one. Okay. So, if you look at this, we have so many applications developed, and in some place, and in the DB context class where we will build the model builder, where you define these kind of things. So if you take a look at this is the online course enrollment application where we have defined the model creating, where you will define each table has what kind of relationship, right? So these are the configurations. So in this case, this is a table called the course, but it has relationship with the category table. It has relationship with the instructor table. So those kind of things, all the relationships like foreign key, all kinds of constraints, foreign key, everything is defined here. So this is how you define the relationship between a table, and this is called Fluent API. Okay, this is called Fluent API, but the other one is the data annotation. Data annotation is nothing but, if you go to the definition of this table, there itself you can use the data annotation, but actually data annotation is very practically not possible to define for complex database structures. For simple database structures, it is okay, but if tables have some complex relationship, Fluent API is best, and this is the best example for that. Alright, so the next one is, what are migrations in EF Core and why are they important? See, migrations manages the schema changes. Schema changes means basically your database, today you design something, as your business grows, your database goes through a change. Some table might have some columns coming up, some structures changing, new tables coming up, those kind of things. That's called schema changes. So basically migration manages schema changes over time, providing a way to update the database schema in a controlled way. So that is your expected answer. So migration, you should know what is migration. Basically it's managing a schema changes. That's it. If you even tell these kind of simple words, that's it, they will stop you. Good, they know that you know. That's it. That is how you will be able to impress the interviewers. And we have done the database migration. So coming back to again migration, there was one of the full stack application that we developed called restaurant table booking app, and that is what you're seeing here. You see this, there was a migration that we added. So as we progressed the application, we know there was some database changes that was happening, and through migration we were able to push those schema changes to the database. Okay, so that is what called migration. Alright, so the next one is, what is the difference between eager, lazy and explicit loading? This is super important. Okay, so basically eager loading means it fetches the related data with the main query itself. Lazy loading fetches the data when it is required to get the data, but explicit loading means you will manually load the data. So explanation wise, you should understand, so every time that you do loading of data, like for example, there are a couple of tables having child and parent relationship. If you want to have a eagerly loading, every single data of those relationships are loaded at one shot. That's called eagerly loading. Lazy loading means the query will be ready, but it will always fetches the data only when it is required. That's called lazy loading. And then the third one is the explicit loading. So you just need to know the difference and what kind of types they have. Alright, next is, how would you handle a situation where you wanted to run a raw SQL query in EF Core? Basically, if you have a query like this, right, select star from customer, basically a table name where you're applying some filter. So if you wanted to run such a raw query, it's easy. You need to use the context.anytable from raw SQL, or from SQL raw. If you do that and pass the query and then do a .toList or whatever next action, it will convert and it will execute and convert into your data set. Okay, so this is possible in EF Core. It's not like you cannot run a raw SQL query. Okay, you can do it. Now, what is the purpose of tracking in EF Core and how can you disable it? So basically, every single time you will query a database table, EF Core will automatically track the entities. So for example, let's say context.customers.first, or in other words, you take a look at this. This is the table restaurant table booking app project that we did. So this context.timeslot is a table .find async, right? So the moment you use like this, the data is coming here, but entity framework start tracking this data. So tracking is by default. Okay, because when it is tracking, if you modify this entity and do a save change, it knows what to do. Even if it wanted to delete this, it knows how to delete. Update, it knows how to update. So that's called tracking. The tracking is by default. Okay, but if you wanted to disable the tracking, then you can use as no tracking method, which means it will retrieve the data, but it won't track. If you modify the data, it doesn't know what to do. But we need to know what is meant by tracking and why and when you can disable it or how you can disable it. Okay, so you can disable it using this method. So tracking manages the state changes to the entities for the updates, disabling it with this one for read-only queries. So only for the read-only queries you should use this kind of a thing, which will increase the performance. How do you handle the concurrency in EF core? See, concurrency in EF core, first you need to know what is concurrency. A given table's record, if more than one person is trying to update, then that's called concurrent. At the same time, same records, more than one person is trying to update. Okay, or even delete it, whatever it is, right? Delete or update is called at the same time is called concurrency. So to avoid that, you can use concurrency check attribute on top of the property that will help us to prevent this kind of a scenario. How would you structure the DB context in the large modular application? So as you are entering into bigger organization, the application is big. Each table will have its own humongous database has its own humongous number of tables. So how do you handle it? So in the modularity, what they are saying is, if you use the DB context separated for read operations and write operation, that will help to have the good performance. Okay, so that's how you structure it. Now, can you describe how you would implement soft delete? So soft delete in EF code, don't get panic. Hard delete means a table has a record that you really deleted. That's called hard delete, which you cannot retrieve. Deleted is deleted, done. Soft delete means we might have some flag for a given record is active. Okay, that will be a column called is active. So for that particular record, if you make that is active as false, which means the record is there but it's not deleted, it just doesn't come up. Similarly, is deleted, there's a flag. If you make is deleted as true, which means somebody deleted it, it's for them it is deleted, but physically it is still present in the database. That's called soft delete. Okay, so whenever you retrieve it, you can query that give me everything that is not is deleted is equal to true. So that's called soft delete. How would you optimize EF core queries for the performance in a high traffic application? Like we already discussed, as no tracking can help you to improve the performance. Okay, so that is what you need to be answering it. What approach would you take to implement the transaction across multiple EF core contexts or the database? Great. Transaction is nothing but you're doing certain operation that has to either succeed or failure. Okay, that's called transaction, right? So today you start buying something. Okay, you're initiating your transaction. Let's say a payment gateway went through an error, right? What happens these days? Either they will tell you that money detected, but they will refund you, but that doesn't makes you feel happy, right? So basically either it should go through or it should not go through. So if you look at this concept, we are starting a begin transaction within a scope. So whenever you use a using class within a scope, that's called scope. If you say using and then open this curly braces, anything that is within here is a scope. So we are starting a transaction. This is the transaction variable. Let's say before this there are 10 lines of code which does some update, delete, some addition or something. Everything has to succeed. Then if you do a transaction.command, everything will succeed or everything. Even if one transaction fails within this, right, everything is reverted. Let's say 10 lines of code, 9 lines code executed, 10th line, it didn't execute. Something happened in the delete. Then this commit will make sure that all the others is also reverted. So that's called transaction. Now, can you explain the change tracking under states? Very, very important question. Change trackings are nothing but if you start querying a database table using EF core, okay, the entity is tracked. Now there are 4 states: added, modified, deleted, unchanged. Like I said, you queried the data, you didn't touch it, then the state of that data is called unchanged. But if you modified any of the property within that entity, that's called modified. If you try to delete that entity, that's called deleted. Let's say there's a table you wanted to add a new record, then such a record's state is called added state. So these are the 4 states that AF code tracks. Okay, so if somebody asks you about this kind of questions, you should know what are the entity states and how it is used. Now the next is describe how you would implement an audit log for all of your code operations. Okay, so there is something called save changes and save changes async in entity framework code. If you override, right, that's called a virtual method. If you do an override of that method and do some logic to log your audits and then call the save changes, that's where you can do it in the centralized position. So that's what they're calling. Where do you do this logging operation in the centralized position? This is how you do. You override the existing save changes and then do your audit here. So in what scenario would you use raw SQL query? So if the queries are very complex where you cannot use the link queue to format that one, right, then you will end up using either the complex queries like this, like a raw query, or you write that complex query in a store proc and you can use the store proc. Okay, and for this specific question, if you use a complex raw query, what is the problem? That's what they're asking. If you are not sending the parameterized parameters, then it will be a problem. So you should always send the var class parameter as parameterized, then only no SQL injection can happen. Okay, how do you handle the large data set in EF code without causing performance bottleneck? So basically what they're saying is, let's say you're an Amazon user. If you have gone to this order history, you will be able to see 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, or maybe 2 years, maybe not, or maybe a particular portion of a year you can see, but you cannot see all of your 10 years or 15 years of your Amazon account, because there is possibility that a huge data can come. So in order to get a good performance out of a huge data set, there's something called skip and take, which is an inbuilt link queue methods. You can apply that and filter only that particular record. For example, I'm saying skip the first 50 records, take the next 10 records, so 51 to 60. So it's like a pagination, right? You're on the 6th page, each page will display only 10 records. So you can use these kind of methods to get particular data set of using EF core. So what caching strategies do you use for EF core for optimizing database load? There are two types of strategies. One is in memory and one is the distributed caching. So if you're using frequently accessed data, you can use the in memory caching, and for instance across different if you are using different instance and different places where in big companies they'll use, actually, then distributed caching is what you have to use. So what does that mean? Basically, different instance means in big organization, database won't be in one place. Same database, there will be replicas present in different data centers, like Texas. One is in Texas, one is in New York, right? They'll sync up the data in the real world, but so that's why they need a distributed caching. So if record goes and insert in one database, the same record gets inserted into another database automatically. That's called that and all will happen behind the scene. That's a database concept. Let's not get into EF core, but basically you need to know in memory and distributed caching. Alright, so how would you implement connection resiliency and retry policies? Very important. So let's take a very important live example. We have a web API which is using Azure SQL database. You deploy to the Azure App Service. Okay, so in general, right, in 20 minutes, if your app is idle for 20 minutes, app will go for sleep. Okay, sleep means if 21st minute, if some request comes, the app will start, then the database will be like starting and warming up. By the time all of these things happens, the first call will fail. The user will be like panicking. Oh my god, my APIs are failing. I'm not getting data. Applications crashed. All of these things will run in his mind, right? So what will happen is there is something called enable retry on failure. That's an inbuilt method that what it will handle is, if failure happens, it will retry in some time. Until it tries couple of times and completely fails, it will retry. And there is a very high chances that when it retries, the connection is established and database, it is able to talk to the database. This way user response will be delayed, but he will get a response. Okay, so that's called enable retry on failure, which is possible in the EF core, and that's called resilience and retry policies. Now we can also ask, how can you enable logging of sensitive data in EF core for troubleshooting purpose, and what are the security implications? So let's say you're writing all of your beautiful queries and you just don't know how to debug in case your query, if you feel the query is giving you wrong results. So what you can do is, there's something called enable sensitive data logging, and in the DB context option, let me show you. So if you say .sql, use SQL server and then say enable sensitive data logging, it will log the parameterized content also. Okay, so this way you know what parameter was passed in your query and what is your actual query. You can find out whether the query is wrong. If yes, then you have written the LINQ statement wrong, so you can fix it. Okay, same thing, there is another one called enable detailed error logging. So there are sensitive enable sensitive data logging and enable detailed logging. So the difference between these two, that's the question. The difference between these two is, the sensitive logging will log the parameter data, but the detailed logging will enhance the error logging mechanism, so you know what's actually happening with your query. Okay, so you can enable using these two options in the thing. Alright, so we have come to an end. So in this video we saw how the interviews questions can come in EF core, in .NET EF core. So if you brush up on all of these concepts, you'll be able to clear EF core interviews easily. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you like this video, do subscribe to my channel, share this with your friends, don't forget to give a thumbs up and write your comments, and I will see you in next important video. Alright guys, bye bye. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more tech tutorials. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to get notified when we post new videos. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Happy coding!